Welcome to Blazor Spark. We're going to build a Twitter clone called Woof to demonstrate how to use the framework. Let's get started. If you haven't installed Spark already, head over to blazorspark.com and follow the installation instructions. It only takes about 2 minutes. Once you have Spark installed, we can run the spark new command to create a new project. We'll call our project Woof. And by default, Spark projects use Tailwind CSS, but for this tutorial, we're going to use Pico CSS. So we can do that by passing the --CSS parameter followed by Pico. Once our project is created, we can cd into the root folder and use the Spark open command to launch it in Visual Studio. Now that our project is open, the first thing we want to do is update our database connection. Can open the .env file, and by default all Spark projects come with SQLite hooked up. We're going to change that to MySQL, and we're also going to update our database name to Woof. Now at this point our database hasn't been created, and we can do that by creating and running our migrations. Spark comes with 3 models out of the box: a users table, or user model, a user's role model, and a role model. All 3 of these will be tables in our database, and you can see these in our EF Core DB sets here. So our next order of business is creating migrations to create these 3 tables. We can do that with the Spark command spark make migration initial. This will create the migration for those 3 tables. We can then run that migration by running the spark migrate command. Now at this point I'll open up my database manager. And once our migration has been completely ran, we'll open up the Woof database. And you'll see there are 3 tables, just like the 3 models we showed earlier. At this point, we're ready to run our application. So let's go to Visual Studio and start up the debugger. This will take a second. And here's our application. We already have a home page. We already have login and register routes. Let's go ahead and go to register and create our first user. Alright, our user's created. You can see here we have a user's dashboard page, and we can also log out. Let's head back to Visual Studio and start making some code changes. So the first thing we want to change is our home page. I'd like to make it more of like a Twitter feed than whatever it is right now. So let's open up the home page, which would be pages index.razor. Let's move our h1 tag up, and then we'll call this our feed. And we will delete this. Now we want to display our Woof messages in a descending list by when they were created. So for now, let's go ahead and hard code what our messages would look, how we want our messages to look like. Each message should be an article, and we'll want a couple header tags. First is our h2 tag. Well, this will be the name of the user who sent the message. So for now, we'll just name it Weston Walker. And we'll also want an h3 tag, and this would be the time at which the message was made. And then finally, we'll want the content of the message. Go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and run our app real quick again, see what that looks like. Alright, looks pretty good. Now if I wanted to create another one of those messages, I could copy this whole article, save it, and there we go. There's a second message. Not too bad, but if we're going to have multiple messages here, we might as well make a Razor component to store this in. So let's go ahead and create a new component. We can run the spark make component, and then we'll call this the Woof message component. And if we open our shared folder here under pages, you'll notice we have a Woof message. So that generated that for us. And we can go ahead and move this logic from here, or this markup from this file to our Woof message file. Save that. And let's go ahead and delete these and call our Woof message component. And voila, still showing what we want it to. Our next step is to take this woof message component and get rid of the hard-coded values and display actual messages from our database. Spark comes with Entity Framework already set up. You can view it here in the application/database folder. We have our application DB context and our migrations. Now, we don't have a message model, so our next step is to create that. We can create a new model by running the spark make model command, and we'll call this message. Perfect. Now we have our message model. Our message should contain a couple things. We want it to have a foreign key of the user that created it. We want it to have the content of the message, and we want to have a created and updated timestamp. So let's go ahead and add our user ID foreign key. And then we'll also add a virtual field, which will be our user model. This will help us query the user who created the message when running link queries. And then we obviously also want the content of the message. And then as far as timestamps, Spark comes with base models hooked up to models by default. The base model sets our timestamps up for us, so we don't actually need to do that since it's already there. Okay. Now we need to get our model into the database. So next step is head over to our application DB context, and we need to add another DB set, this time for the message. And we'll call this DB set messages since it represents the entire database table of messages. And then let's create and run a new migration. So we'll spark make migration, create messages, run that, and once that's finished, we'll need to run the spark migrate command. All right, let's check out our database now. We'll give it a quick refresh, and there are our messages. We have our user ID, content, timestamps, and if we go to our structure, we should see a foreign key to the user table, which we do. All right. So back to our index.razor file. We need to get all of the messages here from our database table. So how do we do that? Well, we probably could query the table directly in our Razor component, but that's not the best way to do things. In Spark, we can set up services which can interact with our database through the Entity Framework DB context. So let's go ahead and also create a service. So we'll say spark make service, and we'll call this our messages service. So Spark will set up this. It already sets up our DB context factory for us. And we want a new method to call that will get all of our messages from the database. So let's set up a new async method that passes back a list of messages. Pull in our reference, and we'll call it get all. Grab our context from our DB context factory, and then let's query our messages table. And we'll pass back a list of these. Now we'll want to call this in our index.razor file. And we can do that by injecting the service. But at this point, this will throw an error because we haven't registered our message service in our dependency container. We can do that pretty easily in Spark by going to our startup/app service registration and come here to the add custom services, and we can just add our message service here. Now we can inject our message service into the home page. We'll need to set up a private variable that contains all of our messages in our index.razor component. And then on initialize, let's get rid of this logger. We can set our messages equal to await message service, wait message service dot get all. Let's go ahead and update this on initialize to the async version. All right, so now we have our list of messages. The next thing we want to do is loop through those messages and pass each message to our woof message component. So in Blazor, we can do a for each loop for each message in messages. We can call our woof message component. Our woof message component needs a parameter to accept the message model. So let's go ahead and set that up. Parameter, and then we need a public message. Now in our index.razor file, we simply need to pass the message parameter prop through, and then our woof message, we need to display the message properties. So we have our message dot user dot name. We have our message.created at, and we have our message.content. Now we have one problem. Right now we're calling this user.name, but in our actual query, we're not including the user who made this message. So we need to add an include statement, and we will tell it to include the user model that created the message. Now when we call this message.user.name, it'll actually get the name. So let's go ahead and run this real quick. And we see nothing. That's because we don't have any messages in the database. So we do have a user, it's me, so ID 3. So let's go ahead and just manually add a message. User ID of 3, this is my first message. And then I created data now. Save that, let's refresh our page, and voila, there is our message. So adding messages directly in the database isn't exactly what we want. So let's head back to our home page, and we're gonna add a new link. We're gonna say /messages/create. We'll give it a role of button. This is just Pico CSS stuff, and we'll say create new woof. Let's capitalize it. Respect. All right. Now we only want authorized users to be able to see and click this button. So let's go ahead and put it inside of an authorized tag. So now only users that are logged in will see this button. Now we're linking to a new page, so that tells us we probably need a new page. Let's go ahead and create a new Spark page. So Spark make page, and we'll say messages/create. This will generate our new Spark folder messages with the create component. Spark sets up our page's route for us. We'll also only want authorized users to view this page, so we can add the attribute of authorize. And let's update our markup real quick. Go ahead and just kind of copy what's in the home page and delete what we don't need. Don't need this stuff. And then set an h1 tag of create woof. And then we'll need a card. Okay, so inside of this card, we'll need a form to create a new message and submit it. Blazor comes with an edit form, so we'll go ahead and use that. We need to pass in a model. We don't have our model set up yet, and we'll also need a valid submit handler. We don't have that either, but we'll go ahead and leave those blank. All right, let's move on. We'll go ahead and stop our app real quick while we make all these changes. We'll need a new model. Since we're making a message in this component, let's go ahead and make our model a message object. And then we'll also need a submit handler. So let's go ahead and add a submit handler called create message. Now we can pass in our message to the model attribute and the create message to the onValid submit attribute, and those should be all good. All right, let's finish updating our form. We'll need to add a label for our content field. That's not how you spell label. And then we'll also need to add an input text area for our content. Blazor also provides us an input text area field. We combine the value of this field to our message.content property, and we'll give it an ID of content. And then we also need a button to submit the form. We'll give it a type of submit just for semantics. Okay, now let's go down to the create message. What do we want to do when this form gets submitted? We already have the content from the form, but we'll want to set the created at. We'll want to set the user ID, and then we'll want to save the message. Then we'll want to navigate back to the home page. Okay, let's start with the first. Set created at. So we already have our message model, so we can just say created at equals datetime.now. Our user ID. We don't have our user ID on this page, but if we come back to our main layout, which is the wrapper around this page, we have this cascading value. This passes down any properties in this main layout we can access from any other component. And luckily for us, we have our user component or user property right here. So inside of this create.razor component, we can add a cascading parameter, pass down our layout, and then within our layout we can grab our user. So now we can set our user ID to the user that is logged in. Then we need to save our message. So we need to create a new method in our message service. We'll call this method store, and it'll accept the message. And then the only things we need to do inside of here is grab our context from our factory, and then add our new message to our context, and then save our context. And then we'll return our message as well, even though we don't really need to. Okay, so inside of our create.razor, we need to inject our message service. Then we can call our store method down here, pass in our message object. We need to await that since it's an async function. And then finally we need to navigate to our home page. Blazor comes with a service you can inject called Navigation Manager. So we can call this programmatically to tell Blazor to go to different pages. And we are going to tell it to navigate back to our home page, which is our feed, and we can see our message. Okay, let's fire up our app now. I'm going to use .NET Watch this time, so any changes we make will get hot reloaded and we can see them instantly. All right, we see our button since we're logged in. Hit create new WOOF. This is my first. We can hit create, and voila. We see the message that we just created. Now, one thing I see immediately that's wrong is this message should be at the top. We should be ordering by descending created at times. So let's go back to our message service and our getAll method, and let's add a .order by descending. And we'll say by created at. Okay, now this should swap our messages. Perfect. Okay, so now we can create messages, but we also want to be able to view a message, edit a message, and delete a message. So let's go back to our Wolf message component, and we'll add a chunk of HTML with a couple links, a view link, an edit link, and then a delete link. Let's start with our view. You can see here we have a route of message/message ID. So we don't have this page yet, so let's go ahead and create it. Go ahead and stop our app. We'll create a new Spark page by running the spark make page messages/show. This will create our show page for us. Now, we don't actually want to say show in the URL. We want to pass in our integer of ID, which represents the message ID. And we want to add the authorize attribute, since we only want logged in users to view this page. And then for parameters, we want to add a couple. The first being the ID. We'll add the parameter attribute on top of it. This will automatically get set by the ID in the URL by the Blazor router. And then we also want to set a message. Now, we don't have this message yet, but we do have the ID of the message. Let's head back over to our message service. So we want to add a new method called get in our message service. And this will pull the message by the ID and also include the user, since we know we're going to want to show the user on our show.razor page. Then on our initialize method, we can run our message service.get. So we're getting an error here, and it's because we haven't injected our service. So let's go ahead and inject our service, and then we'll also need to update our initialize method to the async version. All right, so now we've fetched all the data we need. Let's update the markup. We'll delete our h1 tag. The first thing we'll do is make sure the message is set. So we want to say does not equal null. And then let's pass in some markdown. Set up an article similar to our home page. So we'll have a nice card showing our username, our created at, and then the content of the message. All right, let's fire up our app, run .NET Watch again. Perfect. We see all of our view, edit, and delete options, and we can click on it, and this is my message from the app, and then this should say this is my first message. Perfect. So while we're playing around with the app, let's go ahead and create a new user. So we can go to the register, just call it John Doe. And create that. Okay. So John Doe should not be able to edit or delete Weston Walker's messages. He should only be able to create John Doe messages. So we want him to see these options here, but not these options here. Luckily, because of our cascading parameter we set up in our main layout, we can access the user ID within our Wolf message component. This means we can set up a if statement testing if the message user ID equals the currently logged in user ID. Let's go ahead and set up our cascading parameters of user, and then we can set up an if statement right here. We still want John Doe to be able to view Weston Walker's messages, just not edit them. So say user.id equals message.user.id. Then we'll pass in these two links inside of the if statement. All right, so I'm currently John Doe. I can view, edit, and delete John Doe messages, but I can only view Weston Walker messages. Perfect. All right, let's head back to our Wolf message component. The next link we need to make work is the edit link. So let's head over back to our Spark CLI, and we'll say Spark make page messages/edit. Create our edit page. Now inside of here, we will also want to include an ID of the message. Now similar to our create page, we're going to want to inject our message service, so we can call some update method inside of there. And then we'll also want to include our navigation manager, so once it's saved, we can go back to our home page. We'll set up a new form. And then inside of that form, we'll have a model of message, which we will call our message service by the ID passed in by the URL to get, and then a submit handler of update message. So let's go ahead and add the rest of these things we're missing to get rid of these errors. Add our parameter of ID from the URL, and then the message. Now we need to pull the message. We already have our get method set up in our message service, so we can just reuse that. And then finally, we need an event handler of update message. Let's go ahead and add that. Inside of this, we will need to set the updated at time, call the message service, and then navigate to homepage. So let's do message.updatedAt and then just datetime.now. Call our message service update method, which does not exist yet. So let's head over to our message service. We can set up an update method. This is pretty straightforward. We accept a message, we get our context, we call the context.update, pass in the message, and save our changes. So inside of here, we can call await message service.update, and we'll pass in our message model. And then finally, navigate back home. All right, that should be everything we need. Let's go ahead and go back to our app. Hopefully everything's been updating. We'll give it a quick refresh just to make sure. We hit edit. We're to the messages, then our ID of 3, and then edit. And then here's the message. We'll just add a quick message of update, save, and there we go, our update. We've almost completed our CRUD with messages. The final one is delete. So let's add an on-click handler on this delete button, and it'll call a method called delete message. We can move down towards the bottom, create that method real quick. And we need to do two things here. Call the message service delete method, and then we're just going to navigate back to the home page. Even though we will probably already be there, we need to force reload just to update the data on the page. All right, let's start with the message service. We already know we need to inject the message service. And then we need to call a delete method or destroy. We'll call it destroy, but we don't have that yet. So let's go ahead and add it. Come over to our message service. Scroll to the bottom, and we'll add a destroy method. The destroy method just takes in a message, gets the context, and then within the DB set messages in the context, we'll just say remove this message. Some entity framework magic will work and remove the message from the database. So now we can call destroy and then our message. Make sure we capitalize the M. All right, second thing we need to do is navigate back to the home page. So let's go ahead and inject our nav manager. And then we can call navmanager.navigate to, and then we'll just leave this blank. That'll be the home page. Navigate to accepts an optional Boolean called force reload. So if you're navigating to the same page you're already on, you'll need to pass in the force reload to actually make the page reload. Otherwise, it'll do nothing. Let's head back to our app. Give it a quick refresh just to make sure. And so since I'm on John Doe here, I can only delete John Doe messages. We'll click the delete button. And we have an error. What is it? Object reference not set to an object. Let me double check this. Everything should be set up correctly, so let me go ahead and just stop this and restart it. Sometimes .NET Watch with Blazor server doesn't quite work correctly. All right, try to delete again, and there we go. Perfect. We can create a new message. We can create, we can view, we can edit, and we can delete. Perfect. So the final piece of functionality I want to add is comments to our messages. So let's head over to the Show Razor page, and I'm going to add some markup here. I'm going to add a section for the comments, an edit form to add a comment, and then a div to show our comments. For now, I'm just going to leave this hard-coded. So as far as our edit form, we need to add a new property down here for our edit form model. We'll call it comment. But we don't have a comment model yet, nor do we have a comments database table. So we need to add that. Let's head over to our command prompt, and we can run spark make model comment. We'll open up our comment model, and we need to add a couple things. So a comment is tied to a message, so we know we're going to need a message ID for our foreign key. It also needs to be tied to a user for who created the comment, so we need a user foreign key ID. And then we also need the content of the message. So let's start with the user. Say public int user ID. And then once again, we'll add virtual fields for our user. Come on, Visual Studio. I do not want that. And then we need to do something similar for our message. So we'll add a message ID. And then we also need to add a virtual field for our message. Spell virtual correctly. And then finally, we need a string for our content. So let's head over to our application DB context, and we need to add a comment. Call this the comments table, and we need to run a new Spark, create and run a new Spark migration. So let's run the Spark make migration, create comments. We're getting errors, so let's go ahead and just comment that out for now so we can get our migration to run. Spark make migration, create comments. All right, so our migration has been created. Let's go ahead and run the migration. Perfect. So refresh our database. There's our comments table. In our structure, we should have a foreign key for user and messages. We do. Everything's hooked up correctly. All right, now let's head back to the show page, and we can uncomment this edit form. We'll need to add a new form handler called add comment. Let's go ahead and add that. Now, in our add comment, we'll need to set the user ID. We'll need to set the message ID. We'll need to set the created at time. and then we'll need to store the comment. Let's start with the first one, set the user ID. So we don't currently have that on the page, but once again, we can add our cascading parameter from our main layout and grab it from our user model here. So comment dot user ID equals user dot ID. Then we need to get our message ID. We do have this. Since we're on the show message page, whatever message we're looking at, we need that ID. So this would be dot message ID equals message dot ID. We need to set the created at time. And it'll be the current time. And then finally, we need to store the comment. We could put this in the message service, but since we're dealing with the comment, it doesn't feel like that would really be correct. So let's go ahead and create a new service. We'll call this the comments service. And then inside of here, we already have our DB context factory set up. We just need to add a store method. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll call the store, we'll create the store method, pass in a comment, get our context, and then just add the comment object to our comments DB set and save our changes and return the updated comment object. So within here, we need to inject our comments service, but we haven't added it to our service registration yet, so it wouldn't work. So let's add the comments service to our service registration. Now we can inject our comments service. Then we can call our store method and pass in our comment model. Now this gives us a way to create new comments, but we still don't see the comments on the page. So let's update that real quick. We're going to need a for loop since one message can have multiple comments. We want to see all the comments. And then we see we have a problem here. Our message doesn't have any comments currently. So we need to go over to our message model, and we need to add a virtual field of comments. This way Entity Framework knows to pick up our comments connected to this message. So let's go ahead and set that, and we will add a constructor just to set the comments to an empty list, just to avoid any object not set errors. So if we go back to our show.razor page, we should be able to pick up our comments now. Take this markup and we'll put it inside of our for each loop. The first thing we want to update is the comment.user.name. Want to update the comment.createdAt. And then finally the comment.content. So we currently have one problem. The get method in our message service isn't including our comments. On top of that, it's not including the comments, and it's not including the user who created the comment. So we need to go over to our message service and update our get method. The first thing we need to do is include any comments, and then we want to order them in descending order by createdAt. We also want to add a then includes, which takes our child comments object and gets its child user. So we're going 2 layers down. This will give us all the necessary data we need to fill out this section of the page. All right, let's fire up our app with .NET Watch. So we can view Weston Walker's message here. We can come down. We obviously don't see any comments, but we haven't created any. So let's go ahead and create a comment. Hit create. And nothing happens. If we refresh, we see the comment. Very nice post. If I add another comment, nothing happens. But refresh. Once again, we see them in the correct order. So we're missing something here, and that would be the navigation manager. Once that comment is submitted, we also need to refresh the page. So we're not navigating away from the page, we just need the page to refresh. So as we did earlier, we're going to call the navigate to function. We're going to pass in the messages / and then the ID of the current message. And then remember, we need to pass in true for the force reload. Now let's go ahead and inject our navigation manager at the top of the Razor page. Come back here, let's give the page a quick refresh, and then a message with refresh. Go ahead and create, and there's our message. So we can go back home, we can go to any of these, we can also, John Doe, yeah. So if I were to create this message, create, we can delete, we can view, we can't edit because we're not Weston Walker. All right, so this was a full CRUD tutorial and a little extra with the comments using Blazor Spark. I really hope you give Blazor Spark a try. It's a great way to build web applications with .NET and Blazor. There's so much more functionality included in the framework. If you're curious about some of the other things that weren't covered in this tutorial, head over to Blazor Spark, go to the docs section, and you'll see all sorts of different documentation for authorization, authentication, logging, mail, events, queues, task scheduling, the Spark CLI, and other things as well. So go ahead and give Blazor Spark a try. Thanks for watching.